21% said their agencies hadn't started to plan.
You could change the federal retirement system. The Chief of Naval Operations says all the Navy's investigations into
The Office of Personnel Management wants to know what federal employees think of their benefits.
Welcome to the Federal Leaders Playbook, where high performers in the public sector can push their career forward by learning about the trends, innovation, and technology advancing agency performance. We're kicking off Season 1 by exploring the world of IT service management. We're talking about how federal IT organizations are evolving to manage budget cuts, security breaches, and ever-increasing service demands. Here we go.
This is Eric Lazarson. Been around the federal ITSM space for about 15 years. Worked for a number of large software vendors implementing large-scale solutions. Excited about this discussion. There's lots of things that we can dive into on creative ways to make ITSM successful.
I'm Jessica Alfaro. I've been in the ITSM space for about 15 years, managing multiple teams, a lot of software ITSM implementations, CMDB, working with customers, understanding their requirements, process improvement. So I'm really excited to be here.
My name is Tom Hamill. I've been in the federal space for a little bit over 20 years. I'm leaning towards the technical side of ITSM. I have years of experience installing different applications, setting up from the application down to the network, which gives me a lot of lessons learned on how to do that, from the roadblocks that you commonly hit when you do the installs of the applications. And also I have a lot of experience that I bring where I can take technical issues that we run into and explain them to management, where we are and how we got into these roadblocks and how we're going to get around them.
And I'm Carrie Pastorero. I have about 13 years of experience in the federal contracting space. The last 10 or so have been specifically focused on service management. And I tend to walk the line between business process and the implementation of technology to automate those processes. I spend lots of time on the maturity of ITIL and service management process and helping customers maximize the use of these large enterprise implementations.
Our topic today is going to be ITSM Mythbusters. Sounds like fun to me. It's going to be common myths and misconceptions of ITSM.
Yeah, I think this is one of my favorite topics to talk about. We've been around for many years, talking to a lot of different federal leaders at different levels within organizations. And you get a lot of pushback when you come in talking about service management, service improvements. You talk about ITIL, and people kind of, they look at you strange. They know what it means. They've been through the foundation training, but they're not always well-versed in what's possible. And they've heard from people on the ground some misconceptions or myths. And I think the first one that comes to mind, especially from my background working at BMC, was I can't upgrade to the latest version to get new functionality. I can't do that because we've customized our application. So customizations to an application, people that are in the space know, you start changing the field, you start changing how users interface with it. And in years past, that made it challenging to upgrade. But Tom, from a technical perspective, is it impossible to upgrade a system once it's been customized?
No, not impossible at all. I think you got to put your due diligence in front to find out what has been customized. What are those customizations? And even ask the customer, are they needed anymore? Because maybe the upgrade brings that functionality into it where it didn't have it previously. So a lot of times you can cut down on the customizations that you want to bring over. And that's one of the things you tackle. But getting to know their customizations and why they've done them, and then next is, documenting them and how to bring them over.
I think the conversation around customizations is changing, though, especially with the new and upcoming technology in the marketplace. So I think for many years, customization was looked at in a really negative way and a really costly way.
Yeah.
And with some of these new platforms that are dominating the marketplace, their message is kind of the opposite. It's rather than a customization that is costly, it's a tailoring to your specific business needs, which is bringing on a different reaction from the buyer, which I think is interesting.
I was around when some of the early platforms were out there for service management. They just automated basic help desk tickets, and that automation was very tailored to a specific organization. Every field had a very specific name. Everything was like for that organization only, and it was really challenging as in the federal space, that organization was one small help desk for one small group. And so take the Department of Army, for example. It was one base, it was one group on that base, and then when the Army tried to consolidate help desks, and you start looking at the systems that are automating that, you ran into problems because we don't call it that, right? So then there became this shift of, okay, well, we're going to do an enterprise tool, and we're not going to let you tailor it all to your specific organization. And then we had this pendulum swing that went to no customizations, and it is COTS based, right? It is out of the box. You take these applications as they are. And it was a fascinating shift. And those that were, customization heavy, they would use the myth or, that misconception of we can't go to that because, we've done all this customization. And then one of the other myths that we'll move into is you'll lose your data if you do that. You won't have any historical information. And then that put these kind of mid-level managers on the defensive of, don't come after me, we're too special. So I've seen the shift. And like Carrie mentioned, we're shifting the other way again. Because now you start to have views for each of these groups. So yes, we can have these fields. We can tailor it slightly to what you need. And I know Jessica will speak to this, is at the end of the day, you are following an industry standard process for a reason. And that reason is the benefit and the value of an ITIL process has been realized year after year by organizations just like yours.
Yeah, Eric, just thinking about ITIL and how, because that's where a lot of this has come from, is ITIL, and people think that they can just implement ITIL out of the box, that it's something that, you can just drop into an organization and make it work, but it's looking at a framework and adopting certain pieces of that. And so these software companies are trying to help organizations put some type of framework in place, which is where, this COTS application that you can just drop in, and it's scaled to a point where you can do full-blown ITIL implementation, but many organizations are not ready for that. So it's picking and identifying where that organization is in its maturity, and identifying those small pieces and small wins to get them there.
I think that's a topic in of itself, is how much customization is too much customization. You said ITIL out of the box, and that just makes me laugh.
It's almost like another myth, right? Like if I install this, our maturity level goes up by 2 times because we have this application now installed. So that's like another myth I think you're getting into, Jessica, too.
Yeah,
right.
That's totally the perception. I think there's been countless times where an organization puts a stake in the ground and says, we are aligned to the ITIL framework. Here it's proven by this book I have in my hand, which is just a
I have
standard,
that book too.
An academic book that lots of folks in this industry have. And I think where it falls apart is I can read the book and understand the things I should be thinking about and the way that I should lay out this standard process to get the most out of a COTS tool, but how I translate that into my organization with the specifics. So, I should have someone overseeing, from a problem management perspective, I should have someone overseeing and responsible for the monitoring of that, but who is that going to be specifically, individually, and what are they going to be responsible for, and how are you going to communicate it? So I think there's a big gap And the misconception of we're an ITIL shop because I have a stack of the books on my shelf.
Right.
It's how do I translate that into my business organization, and then how do I automate that through the tool I've selected.
So is that so how would you bust that myth, if you will,
I
to the
busted it.
customer?
I busted it, Tom. So one of my favorite stories, and it was problem management focused, was I had a tough customer that didn't see a whole lot of value in the ITIL conversation because from his perspective, they were doing it. He read the book, he understood what was supposed to be in place, and there was a little bit of a toe-to-toe. And I think my approach to that was to say, hey, I have that book too. We're starting from a similar spot. And then I started to ask some questions like I alluded to earlier of, so who within this organization has this role? Who have you assigned that to?
Right.
And in this organization, what's considered a problem? What are some of the recurring things that happen specific to your environment? And it started to break down those walls a little bit. So,
Yeah, I think you won him over. I'm very
Well,
familiar with that story. And he was an intimidating man. He was a branch chief who had been around. He had been around ITIL for a long time. He had gotten his ITIL expert certification. He had the stack of books, and I think it's great that people are getting educated on that. There's an academic side of it, and then there's the actual implementation of it, and a lot of times they're different because you can't just do word for word what's in the book. The tool will automate it, but you have to know what information to put in there and what constitutes a problem. I mean, those are very basic things, but those are things that people overlook time and time again. So.
Right. It's why are we doing this? There's reasons why this framework is the standard, is considered best practice and works. So that struggle between my organization is unique and can't fit into that standard, it's kind of finding that happy middle ground of there's tons of places where you can continue to be unique, but if you do these standard things, this is the value you get from it. So helping them understand the why rather than I was told to do this. It's now a mandate. So here's my book. What do I do next?
Yeah, it's making sure that everyone is speaking the same language. So if someone new comes into the organization that doesn't know exactly the words that are common to that organization, at least they understand by speaking ITIL speak. It's a common language.
One of the other misconceptions is, I have the book, but it takes forever. I will never. We've been down the ITIL path. ITIL is a bad, 4-letter word in our organization. Don't say it. That's a myth that I've run into. Is it takes forever? What do you guys think from a timing perspective? Does it take forever?
I don't think it takes forever if it's done in small, manageable bites. I think the approach is often, we're going to implement this. It's a one-time thing, and once I do it and wrap a bow on it, I never have to think about it again. So it's ingraining that mindset into the culture of the organization, and then being able to segment the work where you can show value quickly. I think sometimes too much is taken on at once where you're not really looking to a tangible result in 6 months, 12 months, sometimes 18 months down the road. And the way that priorities change and flow within an organization, that's way too long to keep people interested. Right. So I think an approach that's worked for us pretty well over the years has been, if you're sticking on just the problem management front for now, if you're starting from nowhere, we're not aiming to go from 0 to the highest level of maturity overnight, but there are some things we can do within the next 30 days that can show you some value. And that's worked.
I think setting up those milestones up front, right, to say if you're doing change, it doesn't have to be every change process you have in your organization. You can say, let's take the ones that are well-defined that are working now, and then people know and have ownership, and let's put those in, and then we'll put some incident in, and we've got an install and we have success.
Yep.
Then we're going to swing back to you and get a little more.
Right.
As you're up and running and people come familiar, and that no longer is a vision of, oh my gosh, from start to end, it's going to take forever, and everything's going to be in there at once.
Right. So communicating those small wins across your organization, really no matter how small it might seem, if you're taking a step in the right direction, communicate it, promote it, share what you've done and where you're going next. I think that gets overlooked sometimes too. If we hit the milestone, we're very concerned about what's next and just keeping that train moving forward, that we don't take the time to share the roadblocks that we've encountered, how we got over them, the value to the business that was demonstrated, and what bringing in some other entities, how that could push things forward even.
Where do you think that comes from? Do you think that comes from past vendors that have come in and put that out there in the length of time? Where are people getting this? It's going to take too long.
I would agree. It is setting high expectations, or not setting expectations. Just diving in, and this is complicated stuff.
Done it from vendor from location to location.
So I would
standard.
say there are certain. We talk about the ITIL books and the life cycle, books that you bring in and you reference. A lot of large system integrators that have gotten into this space have come up with their own spin on how to implement, because it's kind of their playbook for ITIL. It works. So I worked for HP for a number of years, and we wrote some of the original ITIL manuals. That was part of IT. That was what they did. They were in it from the beginning. We had our own reference guides. We had our own stuff, but it took a consultant to actually understand what that was, take the time to understand the organization, and find that balance of where can I use this tool? Where can I pull this toolkit in and use it? What will this workshop provide? What I've seen more recently is a lot of the, other people have tried to follow that same model of develop our own stuff and tailor, and then go and put it in an RFP to say, this is what we're going to do. Once they get there, I've come behind them and seen those playbooks on the shelf. They're not used. They didn't take the time to roll up their sleeves. They didn't take the time to learn the organization. You have to have so much buy-in throughout the organization for anything to be successful. So things take long, because what I've noticed is if I'm in an organization and I'm a technician, and you're telling me that I have to do something new, so I have to change the way I operate to meet this new fancy model. If I know that I can delay it a little bit and you'll leave me alone, I'm going to do that. So you got to go in and sell the value of what we're doing, why we're doing it, understand their pain points, because we have tools, we have tricks that can help them. But if they don't know that and they don't see that, they're going to be resistant. So I would say that underlying, technician level, project manager level, they're looking at, you're changing the way I do business, and that's scary. So I'm going to resist.
Yeah, I think it's an all or nothing mentality. I'm a big fan of maturity models, and I think we do a really good job with that, because we're able to look at what they're doing today, figure out, okay, they have a CMDB, but it's maybe spreadsheets. So technically, they have something, it's not a full-blown in a tool that's fully integrated. So helping them understand what they have, that it's there, that we can slowly phase things in and help them realize value quickly.
I think that maturity model mentality also helps keep a champion within that organization if you have one, or create the champion if one doesn't exist. So I think everybody, whether contractor or government employee, shows up to work and wants to do a good job, shows up and wants to have an impact, a positive impact on how operations run. I think we've been fortunate to, in some circumstances, work with really strong champions who love to talk about service management, are passionate about it, and will run it up the chain and make sure it's a priority. In other instances, we've kind of struggled to find that person. So I think by helping, you can kind of gauge interest and figure out a way to use that maturity model to show an individual how to take that one first step forward and demonstrate to their leadership that they're thinking about the organization as a whole, that they are going down a path that will have benefits across the organization. So
So what I'm hearing is that it can take a long time, but along the way, there's lots of wins that you can have, and you should absolutely communicate those wins throughout that effort.
There's a continuous component to this, right? I mean,
Yes,
things are changing in this environment constantly. The change in administration brings a totally different spin on budget allocation, on security mandates, on movement to the cloud. There's new things for IT staff to consider and figure out how to work into their environment every day. So I think if you take the time to build that foundation, it needs to become ingrained in the culture where it's not something that has a start and end date. It's just a way of thinking, and it's a continuous evolution to stay efficient.
So if I take that, and we talked about ITIL taking forever, and I think we've kind of busted that myth, and we jump into change management. And you mentioned, the new administration. I didn't think we were going there today, but
let's do it. Come on.
Interesting. You talked about security and new technologies being introduced, which to me means things are changing. You're installing new equipment. You're changing from whether it's physical to virtual, which happened years ago, but government is still challenged with that.
I think that there's a balance for that. So identifying what types of changes. So I think that's where organizations are struggling with change types and what's a standard change, what's a change that does require that level of granularity and visibility, ensuring that the technicians or the engineers that are putting these changes see the value to them. I think most times they don't. So they don't realize that there is a impact to what they're doing. And so I think that's a big part of it. They're removed from the visibility of that to the organization, which I think they should be a part of. They should, if an unauthorized change is made, they need to. I think the downstream impact of that needs to be communicated to them so that they realize the importance of why the process is important to follow. I think because they're removed from that, and they have other management that deal with the brunt of that, and it's not. I feel.
So, are you saying that the myth of change management takes forever is true, or are you saying that there's ways?
There's a balance.
Can we bust this one or not?
I think there's a balance there.
I liked what you said about the standard changes, and I think that's important for an organization. You have to get to a point within your organization that you trust the technology and you trust those that are working on it.
Well, I think they're overlooking that as the opportunity to be unique in an ITIL process. So what is standard in your environment? How do you assess risk on the type of changes that you're making, unique to what your applications support, what business service you support? So that's often overlooked. And if I don't have a good understanding, to Jessica's point about I haven't defined the types of changes I make, I haven't thought about how those changes are touching mission critical applications and the impact that we have to absorb if that goes down, we kind of gloss over all of those definitions, and we want the tool to just make it easy. But if you take a step back and you think about your environment, you can tailor that tool to not waste 4 levels of approval time for a low rated system where if it does go wrong, it's not catastrophic. You're saving those 4 approvals for your bread and butter application where you're making headlines if you have an issue.
How many times have you seen, speaking of headlines, something happens and the CIO says no changes to the operational environment unless they go through the full change management approval process?
More than I care to share.
I think we have maybe time for one more myth, and the one I want to hit on, and Jessica, this is near and dear to your heart, is the CMDB. So I've heard every organization I've went to, they're interested in a CMDB at some level, but I think they also have already by now tried it, realize how difficult it is, maybe haven't seen the value, and so I've seen a lot of organizations throw their hands up and say a CMDB is impossible.
Or do they understand it? Right.
Well, that's certainly a topic for discussion is, do you understand what a CMDB was? Earlier, you mentioned spreadsheets. So spreadsheets are interesting, right? I mean, it's certainly a way to track the assets you have and some of the attributes, but what do you do with that?
Spreadsheets are interesting.
Isolate that one.
Yeah. Definitely a good myth to talk about, because I've been a part of multiple CMDB implementations, and I feel that the adoption of it has been very challenging, and I'm still trying to grasp why that's the case, because it's not from a concept perspective, it's an easy concept to understand. I mean, you have assets in your environment, you have to manage them. Those assets are tied to services that are provided. It seems like it should be easy to pull all of that together and manage that. I think a lot of it is ownership, because many different organizations own different pieces of that process.
So you said something that just kind of struck me. You said services. And to get the full value out of a CMDB, you have to know what services you offer.
Yes. Absolutely.
Do most federal organizations know, or in their IT shop, do they know what services they offer to their end user?
I think the word service is interpreted differently at different levels with different boundaries by every level of person in an IT shop, which I think when the trend is to define services for CMDB purposes, you end up with 15 different approaches to it, not really thinking about it from service provided to your business customer. And I think people get kind of lost in the shuffle.
I mean, that's the holy grail, isn't it? To get these services in and tie them into the CMDB. I mean, have we gotten there?
It's a challenge.
Yeah.
It definitely is a challenge. I you look at it's what are the services. I usually start with, your consumers. Mm-hmm. So who are your consumers, and what are they reaching out to you as an organization for? So then you look at, all right, what are the applications that are supporting those things? And then what are the assets that are supporting those applications? And so there's stepstones to it. And when we talked earlier about maturity model and I mentioned spreadsheets, that's the beginning. So I always look at, the CMDB as there's stepstones to get to that holy grail, to the top of the pyramid, which is, knowing what services you have and having situational awareness of what's going on with those services.
I think we accomplished a lot of myth busting today. So definitely good discussion. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
If you're interested in today's discussion, we invite you to read our show notes and download additional free tools and resources at federalleadersplaybook.com. To learn more about Acuity or to contact any of us directly, visit Acuity's website at myacuity.com.
Thanks for listening to the Federal Leaders Playbook. Check out our next episode, subscribe, and visit federalleadersplaybook.com for more great content. See you next time.